Look, last week Donald Trump and I clinched the nominations. We're going to beat him again.
I think that we need to take a meaningful step to let women and families know that IVF is going to be protected.
What our primary turned into was this slugfest between the Liz Cheney wing of the Republican Party and the Donald Trump wing of the Republican Party.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Thanks for joining us. Today, President Biden goes west. He's taking a campaign swing through Nevada and Arizona, attending events in Reno, Las Vegas, and Phoenix. This comes on the heels of a massive $53 million cash haul in the month of February. Meanwhile, Trump is balancing his time between the courtroom and campaigning. Today, he cast his ballot in the Florida Republican presidential primary. Our Robert Costa and Ed O'Keefe are on hand following both campaigns for us. Ed is following the president out west. So let's begin with you, Ed. He's lovely campaign backdrop there in full swing, we see. So Biden's been campaigning in Nevada and Arizona. You always kind of get a sense of what candidates are trying to say by the places that they go. So why these two states?
It's not only coming to Nevada at all, Caitlin, it's where he went in Nevada. Normally, when you think politics in Nevada, you think here in Clark County, Las Vegas. But in fact, the president today began up in Reno, in the northwestern part of the state, in what's called Washoe County. Democrats have grown to understand in the last 8 years especially, it's critical to padding what are always thin margins in this state. In order to get the 2 or 3 points over the hump you need in order to win, they've learned you've got to run up the score up there in that part of the state. So the president made a visit to Reno that lasted less than 2 hours to go to his campaign office and meet with volunteers, and is now coming here to Vegas to discuss a more official issue, and that is a part of his federal budget plan that would provide billions more in housing assistance across the country as voters continue to say not only the economy is a concern, but the price of and the supply of housing, whether it's a house you want to buy or a place you want to rent. And so the president's new budget includes billions of dollars for that. Of course, it's a budget that will go nowhere, but it provides a convenient talking point in a state that's had its struggles with housing through the years. Tonight, he goes on to Arizona to launch his campaign focused specifically at winning over Latino voters, not just in the Grand Canyon state, but across the country. And there's new advertising that's designed to reach those voters.
Yeah, and I actually want to play a little bit of that because, as we mentioned, he has, a lot of money on hand here, more than $53 million he brought in last month, about $155 million cash on hand. So he's clearly ready to spend that, and in part on an ad series that you just mentioned. I want to play a little bit of sound from that, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Our family's costs are going down. Biden is turning things around because he cares about working people.
Families like us, business owners like us.
This administration is getting things done.
For women, the freedom to control our own bodies, or doctors going to jail for an abortion.
This is the difference
Between Joe Biden
or Donald Trump.
only one choice is right.
And the difference between them is your vote.
So these ads are aimed at Latino voters, Asian American voters. How critical are these voting blocks to President Biden that he's spending money on these kinds of ads at this stage of the campaign?
The fact that he can do it this early, Caitlin, is a sign, they believe, of the incredible operation they've already built, and the fact that they have the time, the money, and the ability to begin targeting those smaller groups of voters in these bigger states where, again, elections are won by 2 or 3 points. The ad, the first one we showed, focused on Asian American families in Arizona, small business owners, designed to target, especially around the Phoenix area, those that may be on the fence supporting the president. The second ad there you saw with women, Latino women, is running in a variety of ways. English, Spanish, and Spanglish across the country, not just in Arizona and Nevada, but other states back east as well. All of it, again, an example, they say, of the way they're going to try micro-targeting different groups of people across the country on television, on streaming, on your phone when you're scrolling through social media, and in other ways as well. And again, they say a demonstration of the fact that with $150+ million in the bank, with a party generally united around him, even if it's not as enthusiastic as Republicans are about Donald Trump, They believe at a time when the former president's dealing with legal issues, his own financial issues, and not campaigning across the country, they can start getting out there, dealing with the numbers that are in not great shape right now, and over the next several months get people motivated and interested to turn out.
Yeah, capitalizing on that money advantage that he has so far. Ed, I do want to switch gears a little bit because I know you're also covering this news out of the Supreme Court, which is that they've given Texas officials permission to detain migrants suspected of entering the country illegally. This is known as SB 4. Biden has come out and said this law is unconstitutional, but I'm curious what impact you think that this may have policy-wise going forward.
Right, the new law called SB 4, Senate Bill 4, can now be implemented by local police, sheriff's departments across the state. They can detain, arrest, and judges can prosecute people suspected of crossing the border illegally. Critics concerned that this is going to lead to racial profiling of people who might look like migrants but didn't actually cross illegally. Others saying it is unconstitutional, notably at the Supreme Court today, while it allowed the law to begin. It called on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to begin ruling on this quickly. Conservative Justices Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett are saying that if they don't deal with it quickly, those challenging it may come back to the Supreme Court sooner trying to get clarification. Liberal Justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor questioned the constitutionality and said it will, quote, upend the long-standing federal-state balance of power and sow chaos. At the White House, which of course tried to block the law, they denounced this ruling, saying it's another example of Republican officials politicizing the border while blocking real solutions. And they called on Congress to do something it has yet to do, take up that bipartisan border security plan in the House and see if it can pass.
Yeah, and all as immigration is a top issue in this 2024 campaign. Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much for joining us from a very loud campaign event or presidential event. We really appreciate your time and going with the flow there. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon. And let's bring in our colleague, Bob Costa, who has been covering all things Trump. And when you cover all things Trump, that means you're covering the campaign and the courtroom appearances. It was interesting to see video of him today casting his ballot in the Florida primary. Primaries are still happening, even though we know that he has enough delegates to have clinched the nomination. What's your assessment of the state of the campaign right now as he juggles the campaign and also these increasing legal troubles?
Well, the legal troubles have shaped his campaign schedule for so long. He was supposed to be in a courtroom in New York starting on March 25th. Now there's going to be a hearing on March 25th to decide when that criminal trial in New York is going to begin. It's likely to begin sometime in April, maybe in May, if the Trump team convinces the judge in that case that they need more time to review documentation from a previous investigation of Trump and his finances and hush money going back to Michael Cohen's days post the 2016 campaign.
I mean, another big headline this week is that Trump's lawyers have said that he essentially does not have the money to secure bond for that $464 million civil fraud judgment. How has Trump been reacting to these financial issues and the idea that he hasn't been able to have anybody insure his bond?
Well, he has not been happy about the situation. His prized properties are on the line. Something to watch is on Monday, the New York Attorney General Letitia James could try to start to seize his property. And it's going to be a complicated endeavor for the state of New York to try to take over a skyscraper, an office building like 40 Wall Street. But that's a possibility starting on March 25th, which is the deadline for Trump to pay up with the bond.
Yeah, and a building that you associate so closely with the president, former president, I should say. As he was casting his ballot in Florida, he did talk to the press. And I want to play a little bit of sound because he was asked about Mike Pence, of course, his former vice president, saying that he is not going to endorse Donald Trump. Let's take a listen.
Oh, I couldn't care less. I couldn't care less. We need patriots. We need strong people in our country. Our country's going downhill very fast, very rapidly. Millions of people coming across the border, coming from jails, from prisons, coming from mental institutions and insane asylums, terrorists. We need strong people in this country. We don't need weak people.
So he says he couldn't care less about what Pence said, but it is so remarkable that his former vice president is not supporting him. It's hard to find recent historical precedent for that, certainly. But what does this tell you about the party right now or Trump's candidacy, that this seems to not be landing with such power as you might have thought.
Trump sat idle while Pence faced a mob on January 6, 2021. That's the context here. Pence is not going to endorse someone who showed almost no emotion or interest in Pence's well-being during the course of the attack on the Capitol. And Pence was subject to a relentless pressure campaign, including a January 5th, 2021 meeting where Pence again and again said he didn't have the constitutional right to overturn the election. And Trump just kept telling him, you better have the courage. Have the courage to do what the people outside want you to do. And Pence kept telling him, I want to do what the Constitution says. And Trump just insinuated in that clip you played that Pence is not a patriot for agreeing to certify the election in the role of vice president on January 6th. Not surprising to see Trump react this way. But Trump has to make a decision at some point, and I've spoken to some of his allies about this. Is he going to make an overture to traditional Republicans or not? People like Pence, who may have concerns about Trump's conduct, not only on that terrible day, but more broadly. Is he going to make an overture to them? Nikki Haley has been very quiet about whether she's going to issue an endorsement or not. And Trump shows no interest, at least at this crossroads, to winning over the Pence-type conservative in the GOP. There's an assumption in his campaign that those Republicans will ultimately just come his way.
Right. And I mean, some of them have. Mitch McConnell, for example, others have ended up endorsing him. But I'm really curious whether what Pence said gives any sort of political cover for Nikki Haley to kind of follow suit. In Pence's description, someone else who served in the Trump White House administration was Peter Navarro, who I know you've been covering this very closely. Of course, he's one of Trump's former advisors. He reported to prison today after being convicted on 2 counts of criminal contempt for Congress. Does this kind of thing have any political blowback for Trump at all? Does it have any, consequence for people that he may be trying to bring into his campaign or a future administration?
It's an odd situation. So many Trump White House officials complied with congressional subpoenas and ultimately just pled the Fifth Amendment, they invoked the Fifth Amendment, saying they're not going to testify at the risk of incriminating themselves. Navarro decided to instead not appear, decline the subpoena fully, and assert that he had some kind of presidential privilege from speaking to Congress. And Trump, it's always unclear. There's no evidence that Trump said Peter Navarro has presidential privilege on all these conversations we had in the final days. So it's clear the Supreme Court, through Chief Justice John Roberts and other courts, have said to Navarro, your argument doesn't hold water. And now he faces a 4-month prison sentence. And this has echoes of Watergate in the 1970s, when some Nixon aides went to prison, not for defying a congressional subpoena, but for their own conduct. And Navarro is someone who participated in the efforts to overturn the 2020 election. He was there working closely with Steve Bannon, in particular, the former White House chief strategist.
Yeah, that's such an important point and a good reminder of all of these characters that have been involved and continue to be. Bob Costa, thank you very much. As always, it's good to see you. And House Democrats are pushing for a bill to protect IVF in the wake of that Alabama ruling. We'll hear from one Republican lawmaker who's supporting the federal legislation. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. A bill that would protect access to in vitro fertilization is getting support from both sides of the aisle. New York Congressman Mark Molinaro was the first Republican to sign on to that federal legislation, and he's urging others to do the same. Scott McFarlane is on Capitol Hill, and he spoke to the congressman more about this. Scott, good to see you. Tell us more about your conversation with the congressman. Why is he signing on?
This Democratic-sponsored bill to give federal protections for IVF now has 2 Republican co-sponsors. And put aside anybody's thoughts about IVF and Congress's role in federalizing protections for IVF, it's undoubtedly a politically volatile issue. So any bipartisan gesture on a politically volatile issue is noteworthy. Mark Molinaro of New York and Mike Lawler of New York, 2 Hudson Valley, New York area Republicans, have signed on to this bill, saying it is the place of the Congress to codify federal protections, despite Republicans in the Senate objecting to a recent Senate bill to do just the same. Republicans in the Senate argued it's an encroachment on states' rights and potentially religious freedoms to have a sweeping national bill move swiftly. Congressman Molinaro making news, telling CBS News he supports the House doing just that. Take a listen, Caitlin.
I admire women who talk about their journey using IVF because it comes with heartache, it comes with difficult challenges, and you need to have a real strong support structure if you make that choice. I'm confident and comfortable being the first Republican to sign on to the bill, and to advocate for that protection nationwide.
You think this sets a marker for other Republicans? Do you think this is something that conceivably could get to the floor without our leadership's blessing?
You know, at a time where we are a divided nation and too many issues here in Washington divide Republicans and Democrats, there is consensus on IVF, and I'm hopeful that by taking this lead and showing that it's important to establish this protection, that others will follow.
There's an uncertain trajectory for this bill. Republicans, of course, control the House floor, and leadership in the Republican Party has not endorsed this bill. Of course, Democrats control the Senate's agenda, and tomorrow, Caitlin, there is a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on women's reproductive rights. I'm told the IVF bill will be a focal point of that hearing.
Scott, it's really interesting that you note where these lawmakers who have signed on are from. These districts are really interesting, especially when you consider the politics of all of this, because you've had Republicans at the national level urging all Republican candidates to say that they're supportive of IVF, but interesting the distinction between federal legislation and supporting it at large. So that's a really good, interesting interview and insightful. Thank you for bringing that to us. Also on Capitol Hill, I know it's been a busy week ahead. We have a spending package agreement to avert a partial shutdown. What can you tell us about that?
Deadline remains the same, 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time Friday. The pathway is clear. There seems to be bipartisan agreement on how to wrap up these final few spending bills that are responsible for the 6th near government shutdown since September 30th. That's a lot in a short period of time. If they pass it, it pushes everything back until September. So Congress gets a reprieve from the standoff. So the next deadline is right there in the heart of the general election in late September. Funding the Homeland Security Department has been the sticking point. How much money and how do you go about funding border security in America at this distinctive, singular moment? There may be a slight breach of these deadlines if somebody tries to draw out the clock. Potentially this leaks into the weekend, but there is a magical silver bullet here, Caitlin. A lot of these senators and House members have spring break airplane tickets next week, and they don't want to miss their flights.
They're just like us, wanting to get out in time to make those flights. Another item on the to-do list is what to do about TikTok. You had this, really interesting vote in the House, essentially urging TikTok to divest from its parent company. But any kind of movement that we've seen in terms of the Senate, I know a lot of senators have said that they are interested in this as well.
This whole thing now rides with the U.S. Senate. The House passed its bill with lightning speed. The White House has indicated the president will sign it. So all of this now resides here in the U.S. Senate. Could be a pivotal moment tomorrow. There's going to be a closed-door briefing organized by the top Republican and Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Committee of Jurisdiction, the committee which has indicated support for that House bill. It'll be national security briefings for members of the U.S. Senate to hear, among other things, about potential national security issues with a China-tethered company having access to U.S. users' sensitive data. It could move the needle with undecided senators. It might not. We'll get a sense tomorrow after the briefing, but this really is an inflection point for an app that is used by more than 150 million Americans.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the kind of unlikely partners bringing together Democrats and Republicans on this as well. But as you say, what those users have to say is also very powerful. I know we've been kind of jumping around all over the place here, but Congress is getting back, so we have a lot to ask you. There was a House hearing on the Afghanistan withdrawal. I know it's been a long time, but this is part of the accountability push. Did we learn anything new from the testimony today?
Yeah, we're jumping all over the place because Congress is over the past 24 hours. Yes, they also, in the meantime, in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, had a hearing looking at the deadly withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. Chairman of that committee pressing some national security officials about who made mistakes and when. And there's consensus that mistakes were made, but some of this fell down predictable party lines, with Republicans ascribing the blame to President Biden, some of the Democrats on the panel saying a lot of this was put in place by former President Trump. There was an argument at some point during this hearing today the families in the room, and there were Gold Star families in the room, we saw them sitting in the front and second rows, deserve answers and more information about what mistakes were made. Congress pledging to continue its investigation outside of this hearing.
Yeah, even two plus years on, still a lot of questions to be answered. Scott McFarland, thank you for jumping all over for us while standing still. We appreciate your time very much.
Same to you, Caitlin.
For now, a quick break. And next, we head to Ohio for the latest on the state's Senate GOP primary. You're streaming CBS News. Republican voters in Ohio are deciding which candidate will take on Senator Sherrod Brown in November. CBS News' Shauna Mizell has more on the race from the Buckeye State.
It's official. Bernie Moreno will be the candidate to represent the Republican Party in the Ohio Senate race, according to a CBS News projection. Moreno ran against Matt Dolan, a state senator, as well as Secretary of State in Ohio, Frank LaRose, besting them both for this nomination. He didn't have that statewide recognition that the others had, but what he did have on his side was an endorsement from former President Donald Trump. Trump even coming to Ohio to campaign and stump for Moreno in the days leading up to the primary. Now, that endorsement obviously played a huge role and a huge factor for voters here in Ohio. Even a CBS News exit poll that was conducted on Election Day showed that a majority of voters who participated in the Republican primary found it very important that whoever the Senate candidate is would support Donald Trump if Donald Trump is sent back to the White House in November. In Cleveland, Ohio, CBS News, Shauna Mizell.
We end tonight on the National Mall, where those iconic cherry blossoms are in peak bloom. This is actually the earliest peak bloom in at least 20 years. How long it will last? Well, that's unknown. Last year's was just over a week. And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.